Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Your Creative and Magical Life. This one is a bit of a deviation. It's a new experiment. It's a collaboration. It's a film review. It's a philosophical conversation about tarot and storytelling. Yeah, I'm excited to share this with you. This is an episode done in collaboration with the Basement Girls podcast, which is hosted by Steph Grossman and Bianca Pérez, who was on the show previously to explore the Lover's Card. And after that conversation with Bianca, we talked a little bit about horror movies and scary movies in general, and had this idea that maybe we could all go see a movie together and share the conversation, share the episode. And I noticed this movie had come out. It's called Tarot, and it's a scary movie. And I was a little annoyed at first glance, seeing how tarot was perhaps being depicted as something very scary and dangerous. But there's more to the story. And so Bianca, Steph, and I went on a Tuesday afternoon to see the movie together on a warm May afternoon in a mostly empty theater, and had a really good time watching the movie, having dinner after, and then recording this conversation a few days later. So I hope you enjoy it. If you're interested in scary movies, if you're interested in film as an art form, if you're interested in tarot, which you probably are if you've been listening to the show at all, I think you'll enjoy this conversation, and you might enjoy more of the Basement Girls episodes. I'll link to their show in the show notes. But yeah, here we go, talking about Tarot, the movie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bianca Elisa Pérez. That's my stage name, but you can just call me Bianca. And I am a poet, although I am starting to kind of dabble in fiction. Who am I? And I'm from South Texas, but right now I find myself in Seguin, Texas. And I love everything horror and everything mystical and metaphysical. And I believe in aliens.
She said it.
So then your poster behind you that says, I want to believe, you don't want to believe. You already believe.
Just scratch out want
I'll
to.
just scratch out want. Yeah.
I believe. So I'm Steph Grossman. I am a fiction writer, and at this point I've had just some short stories published in some places, but I'm also working on a novel. I am part 2 of the Basement Girls. I guess not part 2. I'm the second part of the Basement Girls podcast, where we review horror movies and anything just like gothic and suspense. Like, we kind of have a pretty loose definition of horror because, I don't know, mystery and suspense is just so cool. And so that's also the sort of stuff I write. I write speculative stuff as well. And I'm also a teacher at Texas State University. So I teach writing there. And I'm also pregnant right now. So I feel like I have to keep saying that. So if I sound weird, I think it's because of that.
You can just say, like, yeah, just your excuse for everything could just be like, I'm just pregnant. So it's like,
or like in the future, I was pregnant, so it's still affecting me.
mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Cecily Saylor. I am not pregnant. I'm a tarot reader, a creativity coach, a writer. I have a podcast called Your Creative and Magical Life, which is about tarot and mysticism and living in a way that connects with magic and creativity, especially in an increasingly harsh world. I'm a double Capricorn with a Taurus rising. It's 2:22 p.m. right now, which is my magic number. That's the time when I was born. Yeah, and I'm excited to be talking about this scary tarot film with y'all and doing this podcast collaboration.
Same. It's kind of like written in the stars, one would say. I should also say, just so that you know our dynamic. So again, Cecily's a Capricorn. I am a Gemini. Leo moon, Taurus rising. Steph?
I'm a Taurus sun and then Pisces moon and Virgo rising.
So now you know why we're going to say the things that we say. You all already know who we are at this point.
Pregnant or not.
Pregnant or not.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and go into Tarot 2024. So Steph, I think you wanted to go into the synopsis of the film before we get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Tarot is based on a 1992 novel called Horrorscope, which was like from the 70s to 90s, like horror paperback boom, which Grady Hendrix writes about in his book, Paperbacks from Hell. They were just churning out these horror novels. Kind of cool that it got to see the light of day so many years later, being turned into a movie.
Right.
From what I know, the original book, it doesn't really involve tarot. So it's mostly, they really loosely took the idea. Like the book is about like a serial killer who like is killing people based on their horoscope and sort of using their signs to like as inspiration to figure out how he wants to kill them, I guess. And obviously this movie ends up being very different than that. So with tarot, we've got a group of friends who have rented an Airbnb, I believe, and they're all in college, and they're at this, you know, kind of old house, like, which everyone loves to do, right? You rent an Airbnb, you're like, I want a historical home. I want to like pretend that I live in a different time. And so they're just hanging out, bored. You find out that the main character, Haley, and her boyfriend have broken up. And so then everyone's kind of devastated from that. And from there, they are sort of exploring the house and they go down into the basement and find this box of tarot cards. And they eventually all the friends convince Haley to do a tarot reading for everyone because she's the one friend in the group that like knows about tarot. And she used it because her mother had cancer and she had turned to tarot during that time and was doing readings, and she couldn't change her mother's fate. She kept getting the death card every time. But then she warns them, like, if I use somebody else's deck, you know, that could be bad luck. And then they're like, no, just do it anyway, blah, blah, blah. They're like drinking and all that stuff. And so then she one by one gives them each of their readings. And sort of in an interesting way, like it's involving tarot, but it's also involving their horoscopes. So like, we'll probably talk about that later.
Yeah, Cecily can definitely be our expert there.
Yeah. You sort of, as you're watching it, get the idea that it's like, oh, okay, each one of these there's keywords there that are going to tell us how these people are going to die. And then throughout the movie, each one of them starts getting killed off one by one, sort of supernaturally. And, you know, we can probably go into the ending a little bit later, but ultimately they find a person who had used the deck many years before. And this has been a deck that's been around for hundreds of years, and periods of time people find it and use it, and then their whole friend group gets killed off. And so with this group, they are eventually able to stop the curse. So again, we can go into more details about how that happens, but I didn't want to like do too many details right now because I figure, we have opinions anyway.
For sure, for sure. So I think we can go into like our relationship first to tarot specifically. So Cecily, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, I have been working with tarot for about 7 years, and I actually had a deck for a long time, probably like 10 or 15 years, that was just in my closet. And I never used it because I didn't think that I could, or I didn't know how to, though I don't even remember when or where I got it. And I had always been interested in like ghost stories and mystical stuff. And this was sort of like an extension of that. But when it came to like actually using it, I was like, I don't know, but still I kept this deck. And then there was, you know, at a period about 7 years ago, my boyfriend at the time moved into my house, which was kind of a small house, and there was too much stuff. And I was like, we got to get rid of some stuff. And he had this deck that was zombie themed. And I was like, we don't need to keep this one. So I was like, but I think my stepsister would like it. So I gave it to her. And when I was giving it to her, we did a reading using the little spread in the book and the cards, just because I like knew her really well and knew what was going on in her life. The cards were so perfect. I was like, this shit is on point. And I had actually been looking for a way to sort of help folks. Like I'd been through a situation where I'd been helped quite a lot and I wanted to kind of pass that on. And I had thought about, should I switch careers and become a therapist? And then I had this encounter with tarot and I was like, no, this is what's up. So I started learning it and started giving readings and made a whole business around it called Typewriter Tarot. And it's the center of things that I teach and the podcast I host. So I fell hard for tarot and we'll be together forever.
I love that. Can you also, like, Cecily, just because I'm really curious and I feel like our listeners would really get a lot out of it. Why do you feel like tarot is so therapeutic? Like what about it like brings that out in yourself and in other people?
Yeah, it's and all of us are writers and I have a writing background as well, and more so in storytelling than poetry. When I started working with the cards, I was like, oh, this is like a language that it functions to like tell stories about being human through these different combinations of the cards, but it hits you in a different place than like a written story would. There's like it feels like to me, it sort of hits you in the gut, like you viscerally understand something versus cognitively or like intuitively understand something. And so I just saw that I was like, oh, this is like a perfect tool for writers, especially when we're stuck or like really trying to bang our head against that language problem and solve everything cognitively. Like using this visual imagery could be really freeing and open up some possibilities. But also tarot is just really interested in like articulating what all the kinds of things that can happen in being human. You know, the Fool is about like going off into the world and like changing course and opening up to new lessons. And of course, there's the Death card, which plays a role in this movie. So those archetypes are just a nice way to kind of look at your life to sort of, we get really bogged down in what's going on and how are we going to deal with things moment to moment. And we have a very reactive, some of us, approach to life. And tarot can help us kind of step back and feel like, for one thing, that there's a bigger force involved in the movement of life. It's not just like our individual small self like scrambling through this existence, but there's something like larger and supportive that's playing a role. And then it also helps us like step back and sort of see our life as a story and figure out like, how do we want to direct that life? How can we make meaning from it and not just feel like we're moving through time until we die, which is the like extremely grim way, like end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like a way of expanding the way you see yourself.
Yeah. I think that I definitely agree. And this is going to be maybe my first hot take of the episode. My other hot take is coming soon. But I think one of my hot takes about this, and one that I agree with you, Cecily, is that I think tarot and the metaphysical and the supernatural, it is kind of this letting go of the ego and realizing or coming to terms with a higher way of things and a sort of way of nature, and that not everything is individualistic, and that things are kind of a part of a system, and which I find to be really reassuring personally. So I think my hot take more specifically is that I think people that have this sort of discomfort with tarot, or a little bit more like, not so open to it, they, I think, have yet to have an ego death.
That's a good hot take.
And they need to have an ego death, and they need to realize that, like, nah, bro, just open yourself up. You know what I'm saying? Like, anyways, my relationship to tarot, and I talked about this with Cecily in her most recent, or I guess the second most recent episode on her podcast. And really, like, surprisingly, I don't have a crazy connection to tarot. I mean, I'm very interested in it, but I think some people are really surprised that I'm not like an expert on it just because of the way that I am and the way that my poetry is, and like how interested I am with the supernatural. They're like, what? Like, you don't have like 10 tarot decks already? Like, no, I have one and it kind of scares me. And so I never use it. I'm not scared of tarot as a whole. I mean, I have now the Mystic Messages deck that Typewriter Tarot has, and I've been pulling one a day, and it's so beautiful. So Mystic Messages, typewritertarot.com. Just a little plug. But yeah, I think definitely growing up, my mom is very religious, and so she is kind of the opinion that it's demonic. She doesn't listen to these anyway, so it's fine.
My mom doesn't really listen either, and she's like always like, I'm gonna listen, and then never does. But well, it's funny, on Basement Girls, of course, like our dynamic is that I'm a little bit more of the like skeptic or like the straight man, quote unquote. But I'd say I'm more on the agnostic side of things, right? Like I love all of this stuff, even if my brain doesn't allow me to fully believe. And part of that is because I have an anxiety disorder, so it's probably better off if I'm not believing in too many things in that way. But at the same time, my relationship with tarot is partly like out of just extreme curiosity and interest in it. Like regardless of whether I'm skeptical or not, I still think that it's just this really beautiful thing that's just been with us for centuries, basically, you know? And I think that's so cool, and that there's just something really beautiful about the cards and about the process. And you know, I like what you were saying, Cecily, before about the storytelling aspect of it and how it does kind of relate to writing in a way. And, you know, for example, like I don't own a tarot deck, but my husband, who's like a huge like atheist, skeptic, scientific minded, he has a tarot deck because when he was growing up, one of his favorite book series, The Amber Chronicles by Roger Zelazny, has a tarot component to it. It's a fantasy series. And so he was like, oh, I want to get this and like check out, you know, these cards and like all of that. So it all goes together, even if you're not like a believer, right? And then for me, I had a coworker when I was working at JSTOR, which is like the research database. I used to work there. Everyone there was like a writer and a creative and stuff. And so one of my coworkers used to just bring out tarot cards like every once in a while and do readings at work. And one time I was working on a short story that has not seen the light of day. And it's where the character, she in her head is thinking about her relationship, but she gets a tarot reading done for her job, quote unquote. And so then it's kind of like, you know, this dynamic of like the reader knows that she is thinking about her relationship, but then the person that's reading the deck thinks that it's just about her job. And so then I just did a reading like with my coworker for that character. And that's when I found out stuff such as that the death card is not necessarily the scariest card in the deck, that apparently the tower is like one of the scariest, you know? So I don't know if Cecily, we could talk about that too, because that could have just been my friend's opinion. But, you know, growing up, I was always like a little afraid of doing tarot because I'm like, oh my God, what if I get the death card? And then I found out that the death card often means like a new beginning often. I mean, they start to talk about that a little bit in the movie, that there's sort of different interpretations of it. And so I'd never thought that the death card would be somewhat positive sometimes, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly subjective. Like, what are you afraid of, right? But yeah, I would put the tower, the devil, and the death card as the ones, especially like if I'm reading tarot at an event that's kind of festive, I'm just sitting with people for short periods of time and they get one of those cards, I'm really going to try to say, here's the uplifting spin on this card, or here's the opportunity this card presents. And I really do think, even though some cards are scarier than others, they're not a doom prediction for someone. It's more just like things are probably changing and they're probably uncomfortable, but here's the opportunity that comes from that. You know, death, for example, is about transformation and how the way that things are constructed at one point can sort of fall apart to make room for something else to be born. And we see that in nature, like in winter, everything dies back. And then in the spring, it comes forward again. But the same organic material is all part of that. So, they make a point in the movie, which I think is kind of cute. Like sometimes the death card means transformation and sometimes it just means death. And I do think that's kind of true. Like I have had readings for people where they had just lost someone and were grieving and the death card would show up. And of course, they're going through a transformation because grief will initiate a kind of existential reckoning. But it's also like you've literally been dealing with mortality, So I thought it was kind of great that they allude to that and sort of play with that. Like life is never super wonderful for anyone consistently. Like we all have to kind of suffer and reckon with things and struggle. And tarot is just a reflection of the life experience we're already having.
Yeah, I think like that was what my coworker, when she was like teaching me about it, she's like, I view it more as like a diagnostic of what we're feeling right now. And if you don't agree with something, like, well, that tells you something too, like the cards tell you something and you're like, I don't know if that feels right. That tells you something about yourself. So I always thought that was a really cool reading of it too.
I think even Cecily, you said it when we had dinner after the movie, you're like, I kind of use it as like a weather check, just like the weather can kind of change and ebb and flow. The same thing with like looking at horoscopes or looking at tarot, which I think is kind of the overall message that I got from the movie, is that fate isn't this etched in stone situation. Like it can be changed, just like the weather can change. And I really liked that. I feel like that was really big, a big thought from a horror/comedy movie with B actors.
Yeah, like it was interesting because I was going to say that actually for the majority of the movie, it's about how you can't change fate at all. These cards get pulled and the main character pulls the same cards for herself over and over and over again. It never changes. When her mom was dying, it was the same thing. And then all the friends start dying because there's no way to escape the fate. And I was thinking about how like this idea of that you can't escape fate also goes back centuries. Like this sort of old as humanity concept goes back to like obviously Shakespeare's Macbeth. Mm-hmm. And then same with Sophocles. Yeah. Oedipus Rex goes back to 430 BC, and poor Oedipus ending up having to marry his mom and kill his dad, even though like they thought that they escaped that fate. And then he ends up doing it anyway. And then it even brings us all the way to like Final Destination in 2000,
Dude, those movies still freak me out. Oh, I cannot do that.
This movie definitely had a bit of a Final Destination like vibe to it a little bit. At least at first. But then, of course, the ending, they are able to change some things, right? So I thought that was really unexpected in a horror movie because usually everyone just dies.
Yeah. So let's go into like how Haley, the main character, sets out this divination cloth and starts like reading her friend's horoscope. So Cecily, could you talk about like how you understood the structure of how she was reading?
Yeah, it seems like because they were drawing from this book that was zodiac based, and then they made this decision to kind of focus it on tarot, that what she does is, taking their sun sign into account, and then she lays out what I think are 12 cards in the circle of the zodiac that are on the divination cloth. And then there's a card in the middle that becomes the outcome card. And that card will be what shapes thematically the way that the characters are killed. And there is a connection between tarot and astrology. And the major arcana cards are all assigned a zodiac sign and a ruling planet. And the minor arcana cards, which are like the pentacles, the cups, the swords, the wands, which we see 6 of swords in this movie, but we don't see them very much. Those also have like an astrological designation. They have like a certain degree range inside of a sign. So like I have found a podcast where these 2 women called It's something like Wheel of Fortune, but it's not that. I'll try to find it and we can put it in the show notes. But they dork out about those associations, but that's like really deep. I do not know all of those assignments. So it's kind of interesting that Haley has this very like specific way of reading, which would not have been probably how she would like read around her mother's death and passing, but she's able to kind of like whip that out no problem. And the way that the movie sets it up, it's like, it seems like you have to read with the cards in that way, because there are these other instances in history they come to find out where someone had used the cards and given these readings and the same kind of deaths occur. But like, it's not clear if, you know, if you just use the cards for like a tarot reading, are you spared the atrocity or not? But yeah, so that was a little bit surprising.
Yeah, and I guess too, like it does play into, at least for some characters more than others, their zodiac sun sign plays into their death. Like for example, Madeline, who's played by Humberly Gonzalez, is the Pisces, and she's the one that gets the Hanged Man card. And a part of the reading that Haley did on Madeline is, just like a fish, you swim away from danger, like you just run. So I think she kind of suggested, like, I encourage you to like stick your ground or something like that. And then when it came to her death, like the whole time that she's running away, her friends are like, no, don't run. And then that ultimately kills her. So it's like her zodiac sign kind of comes back to like bite her in the ass, I guess. I don't know.
I think it gave the film more comedy, because I think people, you know, people who don't have a relationship with tarot do usually know their sun sign. And, you know, that's just more mainstream and more familiar. So they can kind of play with like, oh, you're a Capricorn. Oh, you're a Leo. Like, just like a Leo, you did this thing. And it brings in that other element of fate, like have the stars already inscribed on our lives, this like path that we're going to just walk, you know, do we have free will or not? And there were some good like astrology jokes in the movie too, I thought.
I mean, it would have been too many characters, but I thought it was interesting that they didn't, you know, have every sun sign, but that they had, I was surprised they had a Taurus, honestly, because I feel like not nobody's a Taurus, but I feel like I very rarely meet other Taurus. So I thought that wouldn't be in there. But yeah, I think it was cool how there was the foreshadowing and how the sun signs, you know, played into maybe their like reactions. Like the cards said how they would die. And then the cool thing was that the cards were super creepy looking. And then I'm like, oh my God, we're going to see these monsters like come to life. And then of course they did. And they, you know, all had like this very like, I don't know, vaudevillian kind of look, like just very like odd and scary. I mean, the weirdest one was the magician. I think that was, where was that? Oh, that was Paige, the Virgo, being like pulled in 2 different directions. And then she gets like cut in half by the magician. But it was a very like kind of trippy sort of experience that she has. Like, because some of them start out and it seems like accidents, right? We've got, who was it? Lucas, Capricorn hermit.
Yeah.
There was like something about him going on the wrong track in his life. And I had turned to Bianca and I was like, he's going to get hit by a train.
Yeah, you caught that one for sure. Like when she was doing the readings, the words that she was using just had those like second meanings on the plot of the movie. I was like, oh, this is like how they're going to die. But it wasn't to the point where I was like, oh, okay, like this is really dumb. Like I know like how the movie's going to play out. Like I was still interested in like how it would play out. And I think that when it comes to horror movies, I feel like I am not a snob at all. Like I will sit through like the goriest, like worst screenplay ever. But if it's fun and it entertains me for like 90 minutes, then I'm all in for it. Like if you can get me to be distracted from the outside world and not think about my own anxiety, like you have my heart. this, like, I would say for a movie, like, I was in. Like, I was like, this is funny. Like, you know, this is a fun take on tarot. I mean, I'm sure that there are, you know, experts that are maybe a little bit like angry about how it might portray tarot and or tarot readers. But I don't know, Cecily, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I expected to be angry. And from the trailer, it kind of looked like another piece of propaganda to reinforce this notion that working with tarot cards conjures demons or brings the devil or whatever, kind of like Ouija does with the Ouija board. But that might actually be good cautionary advice. So I expected it to be that kind of like shitting on the divination practice. And there was, because of the way the plot was set up, the story was that this was a cursed object. And there was a story, maybe we can get into this now, but the group, in trying to, like, two of their friends die and they're like, what the hell is going on? And they have, you know, they sit down with the police, who are completely useless to them and have no idea what's going on. And Haley starts to put together that these readings are actually playing out in these really terrifying ways. And so they do some investigation and end up finding this woman. They find a woman who lives in the area, and they go knock on her door in the night. And she's, sorry, what's the spoiler rule on the podcast?
We're spoiler heavy. So
Okay.
Yeah.
So this woman is the survivor of another kind of situation. Like, she had the deck for some reason and gave all of her friends a reading, and they all died, and she somehow survived. And she knows the story of the deck's origin, which traces back to the 1600s, and this astrologer in Hungary who worked for and lived with some like dignitary sort of man in the village or wherever they lived. And she foretold with these cards these unfortunate deaths of his family. And he kept trying to have her keep doing the readings and change the fate, but the cards would say the same thing. And so there's this like classic punish the witch element in the story. And as a result of that, she loses her daughter. And then she creates this whole ritual of self-sacrifice that makes the deck cursed. And so that's why in the hundreds of years since, like, there have been these other instances where groups of friends this has happened to. So I appreciated that there was like a plot-based explanation for why this deck was causing this. And it wasn't just that like tarot is bad, it's that someone intentionally made this deck haunted. And I think that opened up like a bigger question for all of us, because the key to like intervening in the fate of these readings and the cards comes down to breaking the tie between this ancient Hungarian astrologer and the deck, so that the fate for the remaining college kids like doesn't play out. And it also brings some compassion to this woman who, when you see her story, you sort of realize like why she would have done that. And it reminded me, Bianca, of our conversation about La Llorona a little bit. Like, she kind of had a similar sort of story. So I expected to be angry, but then found in the story they created some justification for why things were happening the way that they were.
Yeah. And in the tarot community, were people pissed off about it, like having seen the movie, or was it more based on like the trailer? I know that was the original inspiration for us to even see it and talk about it, right?
Yeah, I only heard about it. Like, a friend of mine who's a tarot reader had posted a reel kind of scoffing at the trailer. And so that helped me have the expectation to be angry, but I was like, let's go check this out. I don't know. I mean, I haven't sensed some outrage in the tarot community about it. I don't know like how visible the movie is to people.
Yeah, I think when I was kind of researching, I saw one blog site that was like, hey, y'all, like, this is coming out, and like inserted the trailer. And it was this person that was like, I'm a little hesitant. Like, I hope it doesn't do any harm to our community. But I don't know, like, maybe it could be fun. Like, that was kind of their their take on it. I feel like if any reviews were to say it was bad, it would be for other reasons other than I mean, partly for me, the only things that kind of knocked off like half stars for me, at least, were just like kind of like plot holes where, you know, this Airbnb had all of these paraphernalia, like mystical paraphernalia in like the basement. In my mind, I'm like, you can clearly like super easily message your Airbnb host. Like, wouldn't that be the first person that you ask about the tarot instead of just like researching it on Google? That was my thing. And then it was just obviously like super like, oh, of course, like this is a movie, whenever the woman that was kind of an expert on this specific deck was, you know, driving distance. That was my thing. Those were the only things that I was like, well, you know, it's not like the most tightest story, but it's still fun.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like everyone you need to know already lives in New York State in the movie. Like,
mm-hmm. Yeah, but I also want to say too, I wanted to bring in the fact that when I was researching and looking at like articles and things like that they did, and when I say they, the co-directors did bring in a quote unquote astrology expert, and her name is Angie Banicki. And she was kind of the expert to consult on the film itself. She was like a movie marketing person turned tarot reader, because, you know, she was just fascinated and interested in tarot, and then she just made it her full-time thing. And so I then went through her Instagram, and she's been doing Tarot Tuesday with the cast on Instagram to market the film. So she's kind of blending her marketing and her tarot together, which I don't know to what extent she, you know, consulted on the film. I don't know like how much, but I did want to acknowledge that there was some, you know, they try to do it.
Good for them.
yeah, that feels fun to me. Like, I think it's always nice to hear someone leaving a 9 to 5 to be full-time witch and then sort of walk the worlds and consult on a tarot film. That would be super fun. I would love to get paid for that. If you're listening, I think that's cute.
Yeah.
I wonder, there's no way to tell, but I'm curious, like for a generation younger than me, what this movie, because tarot's really become more mainstream recently, and there's been such a proliferation of decks being made by different artists and kind of being witchy. There's obviously like a kind of posturing version of that, but then I think it's something that's become more interesting for women to reclaim in patriarchy and capitalism. I'm wondering what younger viewers would maybe take away from this.
Yeah, that's a really good or interesting thought. And like, what is it about the zeitgeist right now with people being so interested about like horoscopes and zodiac signs and specifically tarot, that I feel like that's kind of the what's the rhetorical appeal? Help me, Steph.
The oh my god, Kairos.
Oh my god, Kairos. Yeah, Kairos. Kairos. The question you should ask yourself is, whenever you're kind of looking into this, the rhetorical appeal of a certain media is, why now? Like, what is it about the world that this essay is coming out, or this movie, or, you know, that kind of thing. So I feel like the Kairos for this movie is pretty obvious for us. And I feel like that's why it was so interesting that there was this change from it being horoscope to tarot, because I feel like horoscopes and zodiac signs, I feel like are a little bit more mainstream than tarot is, because tarot, at least in my eyes, there's a little bit more of a learning curve than zodiac signs. That question interests me in terms of like, what did they think of the viewers, and what did they anticipate in order for the change to occur?
Well, I mean, I think there's an aspect of it just being like number one, tarot has just such a good visual component.
True.
And then a movie is all visuals. If somebody was just kind of sitting there being like, let me do your horoscope, there's nothing like physical that person can do. So I think that actually it was a really good idea to do it like this. It's just not traditional in the actual tarot community.
Yeah, maybe they didn't want to get like caught up in the Zodiac killer. Maybe they didn't want it to be in that kind of realm.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Because then they'd have to go into like this, the serial killer aspect, whereas this was like much more on the supernatural side of things. Speaking of the zeitgeist, I feel like I've said this before, but I think it's interesting. There was one time I was reading like a New York Times article that said that therapists now are needing to learn about what are horoscopes, what are tarot cards, because a lot of their clients are coming in and talking about that. So that is definitely part of the younger the younger generation, like doing that, coming in and talking about it. And the therapists are like, this was not taught in my like PsyD or PhD.
Dude, no. Yeah, I'm literally like, Sabrina, as you know, I'm a Gemini.
Sabrina.
So, that's like my sentences always.
I actually wrote a blog piece about taking tarot into your therapy sessions and like how, if your therapist is down, or I don't think they need to know a lot about tarot, but they need to be open to your sensibility around it. And that's something I've done working with a therapist. And because you get so much, like let's say you're getting this one card over and over and you're kind of questioning like what this could mean for you or how it's connected to your life or how this card's kind of like an ally. That's like great fodder for talking to the person that you tell all your problems to and are trying to figure out your life with,
Yeah. I wonder if like there's going to be, or that would be actually a really cool class to take, like when you're, getting your PhD or something in psychology. It's like, oh, here's this like elective class you can take about, astrology and how that might affect your clients and like how you can work with that if you're open to it and stuff like that. That's pretty cool.
Totally.
And then you wrote an article about it. So it's the first step too.
And I also wanted to say like, kind of going off of this like Tarot Tuesday that they're doing for marketing. I like looked up on the tarot website itself and I was like, why the fuck did they not sell the tarot deck as like a merch?
I'm surprised too. I thought that was just going to be built in, like I didn't even question that they would have like done that. So that's weird that they didn't.
Right? I know. Maybe, I don't know. If anyone here is listening, I don't know, maybe you should paint it and then sell it. And because, I think it did have this aspect of like hand painted, right? I remember that part of it. And then another kind of fun fact is Nicholas Adams, aka James McDonald, who wrote Horrorscope. He kind of goes by like a pen name, which is Nicholas Adams. He co-wrote this book called School of Wizardry, and it's like a series as well. And it kind of blew my mind a little bit because it came out in 1990, but then Harry Potter itself came out 7 years later. So, and it kind of is the same premise. I know.
Is he the one that sued? I know there was someone that sued J.K. Rowling.
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. I didn't see any of that in my granted, I was looking at Wikipedia, so. But yeah, it was just it was like very similar stories.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that. And then
he had a premonition.
Oh yeah, I know, right? The premonition. I also wanted to say, like, just on the kind of horror movie aspect of it, I was really taken aback and loved the title scene, which reminded me of like Scream's infamous title scene with Drew Barrymore. And that was at the time the longest title scene ever. And so I think on a second watch, I would probably time it and see if it's longer and or like comparable to Scream's. Cause I feel like that's a really cool kind of, I don't know, like kind of call to other horror movies. Because that kind of seems to be a like theme that horror movies are doing nowadays, where they do like longer and longer title scenes for reasons I'm not too aware of. I feel like I think it's a conversation that they're probably having, like directors and or writers are probably having. And I feel like I'm not a part of that conversation, sadly. But yeah, I thought that was so cool. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I didn't expect it to be like, I just thought we were jumping into that movie and then 10 minutes later, it's just like tarot comes across the screen. And I was like, oh, okay. But I didn't even think about the fact that it might be paying homage to Scream a little bit, or, you know, or just like being inspired by that type of filmmaking. So yeah, that's a really good Easter egg that you noticed.
I'm really good about those. And then going towards the end here and my take on the ending. So
what's your take? We've been waiting.
Well, before I say my take, I want to know what you all thought of the ending, specifically about how they treat the astrologer's final death.
Yeah, should we say kind of how they engineer that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, in the midst of, so it's down to 2, possibly 3 members of this group of 7.
Ooh, 7.
And it's Haley and the guy she broke up with.
Is that Grant?
Grant, yeah.
The Leo, the devil card.
Yeah, the hot couple. They're back at the mansion because they've tried to destroy the deck and they throw it in the fire, but it doesn't burn. Also, just quick side note, this is a good cautionary tale on not using a deck that doesn't belong to you without permission. Or if you go into a basement filled with mystical, esoteric objects that look like they could be haunted, just back away.
Yeah, just don't touch.
No touchy.
And it's also funny, they like run out of beer, and that's what sends them on this search through the house.
If they just had one more 6-pack, they would have been fine.
They planned better or budgeted their alcohol differently. But yeah, so they try to burn the deck and it doesn't, because the woman they found who lives conveniently nearby tells them, you need to destroy this deck. So they try to do that and it doesn't burn. And then Haley's so smart. She's like, well, if these readings seal our fate, then I need to do a reading for the astrologer. And so both she and Grant, she's being chased by the manifestation of the death card. He's being chased by the devil. And they're moving through the mansion and she gets the deck and she's able to like, you know, get in the circle they've cast and like throw the cards. And the astrologer's outcome card is the death card. And then we see Haley has like some verbal exchange with her, and we see the astrologer in this kind of like phantom form. She's kind of veiled in a black dress, and things start to kind of disintegrate from there. And for me, I thought like that worked out plot wise in terms of like taking matters into their own hands and kind of trying to break the curse. But I did want to see something that I think you're picking up on, Bianca, that like more address of the astrologer's plight and a little more like compassion or empathy or acknowledgement for like what she lost and why she may have created this curse. Because I think the trope of witch hunting is made to be, I don't know how to describe it or how it's kind of thought of in a larger context, but that shit really happened.
Mm-hmm,
and like women who lived in the woods and like used plants to heal people would be dragged into town and
set on fire.
Yeah, because there was a disease outbreak or something like that, and they were just accused of being witches. And so this isn't exactly that, but it would be nice, I think, to see a different treatment or like a little more thrown in there in terms of compassion or empathy or acknowledgement for the pain that, you know, magical women would endure or had to suffer at the hands of like skeptics, or I guess you're not skeptical if you believe someone's a witch, but
yeah, that's the irony of it, right? Steph, what do you think?
I did think that it was really clever. The idea of doing a reading for the astrologer is like, oh, that makes sense, you know?
I agree.
I thought that was a clever twist. And I at least feel like they did try to give a little bit more of that compassion, right? Because in that exchange that Haley has with her, she does say it's not fair what they did to you.
Yeah.
I mean, and then there was that sequence of her like sort of going backwards in time and then eventually like holding hands with her daughter again, who had been killed by the crowd. And, you know, I thought that was all good. But then she still had like a very like scary end. It was still unsettling in the way that she disappeared. And so, yeah, I thought that they hit on that a bit. But I think you're right, Cecily, that there, maybe could have been a little bit more of that, or sort of not have it be random, like have it be like that there was this like growing awareness of it throughout the movie, you know, rather than it all just sort of happening at once and then being like, oh, now we're compassionate suddenly, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. There was some nod towards it. And maybe I watch way too many like ghost investigation shows. And I think there's a problem with the whole like, we release you, go to the light. And now this place is suddenly not haunted. But maybe something like setting her free from some indication that maybe like her suffering would end, or there was some kind of like peace on the other side for her instead of just this kind of like disintegration. But yeah, I think I'm probably being a little nitpicky. Bianca, what did you think?
Well, okay. I didn't plan on doing this at all, but I watched Silent Hill a day before going out with you all. And Silent Hill kind of, it has also this idea of like witch hunt and religion coming for witches, like religious institutions coming for witches. And there's also like resolution or the sort of like theme of revenge. But the big bad in Silent Hill is the bad side of the main character. And there is a light side to her as well that has been taken from her and put into another person. And that other person has come back and they think it's her. So, but what I want to really get at here is this idea of like the light and the dark that we have in us. And this is also coming off of my conversation with Cecily on her podcast when it comes to like the Lover's card and the zodiac sign of like Gemini, this idea of there being this duality in everybody. And so coming off of all of that, it was just kind of this like, I don't know, it was very like syncopated in my head, I guess. And so then when I saw the ending and then there was a quick scene, a quick flash where it is the astrologer, but how she looked when she was alive. And then she blew out the candle and then there was like the final death. And to me, I feel like that was the resolution that I felt like it was appropriate for the movie, because that was the astrologer blowing out the candle was her light side, letting go of her revenge, of her dark side. Like there was kind of this separation of the self for her, and she could not see the light in things. And she completely surrendered to her dark side and did that like self-sacrifice because she was just so distraught from her daughter's death. I mean, as one would be, that she completely forgot about her own kind of well-being. And so her coming back at the end, because I'm like, why would they? Like, we hadn't seen her as she was. We only saw her like that in flashbacks. We hadn't seen her like as a whole person and not like a supernatural depiction of her until that point. And so then I was like, okay, there has to be a reason why. So that was my hot take. Because I understand that. Like, that just makes so much sense to me.
I think that's a good read. That's compelling to me. And maybe, I mean, that scene moves really quickly because they're trying to save their own lives, and like death and the devil are like at their feet or at their backs. So there's kind of like a rush of splices and illusions. But I think you're picking up on really good details, and that lends a little more agency towards her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what does it mean? Because I feel like I know somewhat of what it means to like blow out a candle. in a more like ritualistic sense. But can you kind of shed light on that for us, Cecily?
I may not have like tons of expertise on this, but I just think of it as a kind of closing out, and like the ritual is complete. The sort of like, so be it, may it be so moment where the ritual has run its course or it's been completed and enacted. And then it's this kind of separation from the spell. Like we have to go back to life and be in the material world and sort of wait for the results of this magic to play out. But it's a way of like kind of bringing yourself back into the material plane and releasing whatever spiritual beings you may be working with to their side, so that you're not entangled in some messy way in the days to come.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Is that why we blow out candles for our birthday? Like on our birthday cakes, like we're sort of moving on to the next.
Probably. I love that.
Never thought of it like that. That's cool.
That's so cool.
I like that.
That makes me want to like, that makes me, because I usually always get so like embarrassed about the whole like, oh, now everyone's singing to me, now I've got to blow up my candle, but now that actually brings a nicer like,
you're like, no, actually this is for me, this is a closing of one era and a beginning of another.
That's the death card, right?
That's there. The death card.
Yes.
With icing.
Yes. I was really excited to tell you all about my take on the ending, because I like thought of it immediately and I was like, I like that ending. Like that ending was cool. But yeah, is there anything else that you all want to just make sure that we touch on?
Well, one thing with it is that's the ending of the drama, but that's not the full ending of the movie, because then there is sort of the get out aspect of it that happens after they've put to rest the astrologer, and then at that point you're like, oh my God, are they still going to die? Like, what the heck is going to happen? You know, because that's, again, what my first thing. I'm like, okay, something's going to happen where their fate is still sealed. And then like this car pulls up, and then it's their friend, the tourist Paxton, who had, you know, been chased by the fool and was in an elevator and was what we thought was almost certainly going to die. And then it turns out that he has gotten his car and has driven to the house.
Yeah, his roommate is the one that stopped it. He like just came in. And that's when I was like, okay, yeah, things can be stopped. Like, I don't know. I thought it was just Paxton was like that, like comedic relief character.
Yeah. Well, it's probably that if we're thinking about the simultaneous stories going on, he's in the elevator, like about to die. Oh. And then at the same time, they have now, you know, broken the curse. And so then suddenly it all stops.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that simultaneous timing. Yeah.
And he was, what the reading had told him was that he was going to like come through for his friends in some way. I had thought that would mean his like dead body was going to just like come through the house at some point. But no, that was a lot better. But yeah, it gave me a lot of Get Out vibes, because I remember at the end of Get Out too, it was like, you know, he's gotten out of the house and then this car pulls up and it's his friend. And I was like, oh my God, are the police going to come and shoot them both now because they're black men? And
yeah,
I kind of liked, well, in Get Out, I'm so glad that didn't happen. And then in this movie, I'm glad it didn't, that there wasn't something more, and that they kind of fake us out, because then they go to like the credits and then there's like another moment where they're in the car driving around like near a cliff, and I'm like, oh my God, are they gonna die now? And then they don't. So it just faked us out a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought Paxton's survival, I don't know if I agree with you, Steph, on like how it timed out, because I feel like I thought it kind of had played on that like fate part, because we saw the readings that Haley gave, or just listening to the language that she used, those kind of tropish phrases like, you know, you're a fish and swim away from danger, or the Taurus for Paxton, it was like, you're going to show up for your friends, that maybe that was like fate sort of protected him in some way.
Mm.
Just like this random, his random roommate shows up at the moment that the fool is about to like take him out.
I could see that too.
Yeah, it kind of played with that question for me of like how much of fate is sealed and how much agency do we have? And Paxton had this kind of like cute spin on that big existential question. That was my only thought. It wasn't super important. I think, Steph, there's a good chance you're right about the timing, and it also doesn't matter.
It could be both. I think it's both. Like there was the fate and maybe the timing.
Yeah.
Fate and time go together.
That is so true.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So true.
Any other last thoughts?
I think, well, for me, that's it. Although I did again enjoy this movie a lot more than I had expected. Although I didn't know anything going into it because I let it be a surprise.
Same.
But I think partly because I hadn't heard about it. Like there wasn't like a lot of marketing for it, so I was like, okay, how B movie is this going to be? And it turned out to be, I thought, like really good and. Yeah, I think I'm in an era of like, oh, I like when horror has some sort of lighter ending sometimes, like however it might be. It doesn't have to be the same way each time. But so I was pleasantly surprised by that. And, so it was a nicer, more uplifting ending than I expected. And in a way, like that's what I needed right now, maybe or something.
And I appreciated that the movie itself didn't take itself too seriously. Like I think it understood where it would land in the horror, genre. And so it played into the tropes that it has. And I feel like directors and writers know A24 movies, right? And so they know that audiences are going to feel what they feel when they go see an A24 production. And so now they're like, okay, if that's the standard, like we're going to understand that we're below that, and that's okay because we're going to have an audience there either way. And I feel like there's something like really wholesome about that. And I root for the underdog. I love A24, but I'm also all about, again, movies that just serve to entertain, and they're not here to win Oscars, and like that's okay. And I appreciated it. I liked it. Overall, 3.5.
Yeah, and I would say if you're tarot curious or tarot interested or a full-on tarot dork and you like horror, this is fun. This is enjoyable. I loved the soundtrack. I thought it was like well shot. I liked how it was both a modern movie and some of this soundtrack. I don't know if this is true or just like another strange impression I took away with me, and maybe I'm connecting it to the 1993 book. And Steph, when you found that it was connected to that was really exciting because that was like when I was a freshman in high school and I was reading like Christopher Pike novels, which they weren't full horror books, but they were definitely like scary, mystical, or thriller sometimes. So I just seeing the cover of that book was like very, very rewarding to me. And it felt like the music sometimes kind of played with the longer timeline they're working with, like taking this story and updating it and bringing in the tarot element. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised and really had a lot of fun seeing it with y'all on a Tuesday afternoon in a mostly empty theater.
On a Tuesday, matinee.
That was pretty awesome. And it was also a hot theater.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was weird. Yeah. I was sweating.
I was like, man, is this like on purpose for
hot yoga?
Yeah, for the scariness of it. But yeah, overall, I'm so glad, Cecily, that you invited us to go and see this with you. Because again, this is kind of a crossover episode between Basement Girls and My Magical and Creative Life. And I think that there are more instances where obviously this could happen again, this little crossover.
I would love that. Yeah, if it's witchy, if it's mystical, or I'm into it. So
okay.
Thank y'all for collaborating. It's super fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yay.
Should we do our little goodbye on our end?
I was gonna say.
So at the end of all of our episodes, we all have to say bye, like simultaneously. On 3, we go bye. And so I feel like we need to have that with you because you are a guest.
I'll do it.
All right. So on 3, 1, 2, 3.
Bye. And then our music starts.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation about Tarot, the movie. I wonder if you'll go see the movie too or watch it at home. And if you do, I wonder what you'll think. I wonder what else you'll notice that we didn't discuss. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at hello@typewritertarot.com. And I hope I get to do this again with Bianca and Steph. I want to thank them for collaborating with me and being open to a crossover episode. We had a lot of fun seeing the film together and talking about it together. And yeah, I just love to do it again. I'm waiting for the next perfect witchy movie to present that opportunity. And if you have any ideas, feel free to share those as well. Thanks again for listening. It's always wonderful to have you here. And if you're enjoying this journey and you're not already spending a little time with Typewriter Tarot, I hope you'll consider it. You might sign up for our email newsletter by going to typewritertarot.com. That's how you'll find out more about upcoming workshops, some of which are free. Yeah, we're just a bunch of weird, witchy, mystical, creative people trying to make art and change the world and to find more of our kind, to build our numbers and to have more fun together. So I'd love to see you if you'd like to hang out. Thanks again for being here. I'll talk to you next time.